Hey, Monster Kids, let's get our horror on. Halloween, 1978, rated R, 1 hour, 31 minutes, directed by John Carpenter, written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. The first and immortal best of the franchise. No matter how close they come to imitating it, nothing compares. It's a slow burn of suspense with a very simple presence. After a small boy murders his sister on Halloween night, he spends the next 15 years locked in an asylum. He escapes on Halloween and returns to his hometown to kill. Most likely to recreate the night he killed his sister, although this is never actually said. This is what makes the movie so scary. By a chance encounter, he fixates on Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, and the young boy she's supposed to babysit that night. My theory has always been that she reminds him of his sister and the small boy of himself. Hence the reason he stalks the boy leaving the school and her throughout the day. Her friends are too distracted by the boyfriends they plan to meet that evening, and Laurie is the only one to realize that something is amiss in their normally quiet neighborhood. Donald Pleasence is absolutely wonderful as Dr. Sam Loomis. PJ Soles as Laurie's friend Linda, and Charles Cyphers as Sheriff Brackett. Great atmosphere, cinematography, and musical score make this film a must-see, one of my top 5 favorite horror films of all time. Halloween 2, 1981, rated R, 1 hour, 32 minutes, directed by Rick Rosenthal, who would eventually come back to direct Halloween Resurrection and completely destroy the franchise for years to come. But I digress. Written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. Let me begin by saying I really love this sequel. As sequels go, it has always been my favorite. So when I mention what I think is wrong with it, don't be misled. One of the only sequels to ever pick up seconds after the first one ended. Like the poster says, more of the night he came home. And because Dean Cundey returns as cinematographer, it is seamless. Donald Pleasence returns, Jamie Lee Curtis returns, Charles Cyphers returns. But because this is a continuation, the strength and sheer horror of the original's ending is wiped away. The new plotline that Carpenter created, even he admits is lazy writing, and came after a night of drinking. It gives our masked killer motivation for his rampage, and quite frankly, this takes away from the simple scariness of not knowing why he kills. But for me, it doesn't matter. I think this is a great film, and it was meant to conclude here and come to an end. Had the story of Michael Myers stopped here, I can say I'd be okay with that. Halloween 2 takes full advantage of exploring all the horrific things that surround the holiday. Celtic legends, razor blades and apples, etc. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, 1982, rated R, 1 hour and 38 minutes, written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, produced by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. John Carpenter's plan was to tell a different Halloween-themed tale every year, an anthology of movies. A great idea that I wish they continued to go forward with, but because of an audience that was already knee-deep in Jason and the like, they naturally expected another Michael Myers story. I must tell you, I was one of the people who left that theater scratching my head, wondering what happened. What happened was it was advertised and packaged wrong. In fact, it would have made more sense to just call this movie Season of the Witch. But putting that all behind, it's truly a great little horror movie. And as years went by, I truly came to like this picture. It does, however, own a huge nod to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but it holds its own. A Halloween mask store owner is murdered. The victim's daughter and a doctor, played by Tom Atkins, turn sleuth and trace clues to a small town, where they uncover a heinous plot being conducted by the Silver Shamrock mask maker Connell Cochran, played by Dan O'Herlihy, who steals the movie. This is a fun movie to watch at Halloween time, even if there is no Michael Myers in it. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, 1988. Rated R, 1 hour, 28 minutes. Directed by Dwight H. Little. And written by Alan B. McElroy, Denhai Lipsinas, Larry Ratner, and Benjamin Ruffner. I can't believe it took 4 people to write this. For the most part, it's sort of a retelling of the original. Sort of. After the financial failure of Halloween 3, it took 6 years to get this picture off the ground. Not without many false starts, mind you. Originally, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill were on board as producers. Dennis Etchison penned a script for it, and it's available to read online, and I suggest you do. Without going too far off the mark, let me give you an example of what could have been. The town's fear of the dread of Michael Myers is what keeps him immortal. The townsfolk stifle any memory of that night, hence keeping the boogeyman at bay. But before long, fear of the unknown unleashed the shape. The story was to actually start on Halloween night in 1978. The Wallaces return home to find police at their house. Annie, their child's babysitter, has been murdered. Some really creepy stuff happens, but you'll just have to read the script online to find out what. Then it jumps ahead to the present, and the Wallace's child, Lindsay, is now 17. Well, that's not this Halloween 4. Executive producer Mustafa Akkad and John Carpenter decided to part ways, and when Akkad read Etchison's script, he deemed it too cerebral for audiences to handle. Jamie Lee Curtis refused to come back, so the character of Laurie Strode was established dead by car accident before this new story began. It begins 10 years after the original story's final. Laurie is survived by a daughter, Jamie, who's 9 years old and played incredibly by Daniel Harris, who is now being raised by family friends. Myers has been in a coma since 1978. He awakens on October 30th, 1988, and heads back to Haddonfield, just in time for Halloween, to search for his niece. Donald Pleasance returns as Dr. Loomis. That's right, also not dead. Pleasance always brings an A-plus performance no matter what movie he's in. This is a decent movie. I just wish Mr. Akkad had a little more faith in the intelligence of his audience. Dennis Etchison had a heck of a script, and I wish we had a chance to see it on film. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, 1989, rated R, 1 hour, 36 minutes. Written and directed by Dominique Otherin-Girard. Motivated by the success of Halloween 4, Akkad rushed another sequel into production. The filming began without a finished script. It ignored the impressive and shocking ending to Halloween 4. It created characters that even the writers admit they couldn't explain. They figured whoever wrote the next picture would figure it out. This is the film I think ruined the franchise. Everything about it is so wrong. From the bubbly airhead final girl to the ridiculous Keystone Cops, all the way to the Myers house that looks nothing like it did in the original film. They don't even try here. Donald Pleasance, yes, back again, brings another stellar performance. Unfortunately, not even he can save this film. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, 1995, also known as Halloween 6, Origin of Michael Myers, rated R, 1 hour, 27 minutes, directed by... It would take 6 years to recoup after the mess that was Halloween 5. This sequel was written by a very passionate fan, and I believe that, because I'm sure it wasn't easy answering all those nonsense questions raised in the last film. And just like Hollywood, there was all kinds of post-tampering with this film. And what you have is a very incoherent story. Sadly, this would be the final performance of Donald Pleasence. He passed away before the movie was released. It's also the first film for Paul Rudd, who went on to have a great career. A producer's cut, containing everything Hollywood removed, circulated through trade shows for years, until finally being released to the public in 2015. It's better than the theatrical release, but it still leaves a lot to be desired. Halloween 20 years later, or mostly known as H2O, 1998, rated R, 1 hour, 26 minutes, directed by Steve Miner. Written by Robert Zappia and Matt Greenberg. After the enormous success of Wes Craven's movie Scream, the film that explained the rules of a horror movie, along comes H2O to break the rules. Instead of trying to tie in the tired plot line from the last 3 films, H2O would do what hadn't been done before: ignore the timeline with the exception of the first 2 films. Unsuccessful in getting John Carpenter to return, they did manage to bring on Steve Miner, who directed one of my favorite Friday the 13th films, Friday the 13th Part 2. However, Jamie Lee Curtis did return, reprising her role as Laurie Strode 20 years later after that terrifying night in 1978, now a single mother with a 17-year-old son named John, living in California, far away from Haddonfield, Illinois, after faking her death and changing her name. Adam Arkin plays Laurie's love interest, and Janet Leigh, Curtis's real mother, makes a cameo as the school secretary Norma. The story is thin, but the suspense and scares are excellent. The ending sure packs a wallop and would have been a satisfying way to end this story. Halloween Resurrection, 2002, rated R, 1 hour, 35 minutes, directed by Rick Rosenthal, written by Larry Brand and Sean Hood. Rick Rosenthal, who brought us the seamless Halloween 2, returns to completely drive the franchise deeper into the ground than ever before. This is the worst of the series. First and foremost, it takes a fantastic climax in H2O and throws it into the toilet. Instead of just starting a new story altogether, we are spoon-fed some nonsensical explanation that Laurie killed the wrong person. At some point, the Shape crushes an EMT's voice box, switches clothes with him, puts the mask on his head, and he is the one that's loaded into the van at the end of H2O. Are you kidding me? What a load of nonsense. And if Rosenthal didn't feel he ruined the previous film enough, he then kills off Laurie Strode in the first 10 minutes. A horribly written scene of a weak death to a strong character. Due to her contract, Jamie Lee Curtis was forced to be in this film. She agreed only if her character would be killed off. Once we get past this, an even more ridiculous story starts, about a guy named Freddie Harris, played by Busta Rhymes, who runs a company called Dangertainment. Freddie plans a competition involving college students who have to spend the night in the Myers house on Halloween. This will be live over the internet with multiple cameras. The house is set up with phony scares to liven the show. And guess who shows up? Who cares? Busta Rhymes seems to have fun with this part. Tyra Banks does a good job. Thomas Nicholas from American Pie, well, he probably needed the work. The only thing positive I will say is the Myers house was built as an exact replica of the original, but the rest of the movie is a piece of trash. There are actual petitions to have this installment removed from the series. Halloween 2007, rated R, 2 hours, 1 minute. Written and directed by Rob Zombie. Halloween, the reimaging, because Rob Zombie didn't want to use the word remake, especially after he condemned remakes so many times before. Wow, I had high hopes for this movie, because, as I've always stated, Rob has a creative vision. He just shouldn't write story and dialogue. So what do we get? A hillbilly backstory from hell with nothing but screaming F-bombs and poor white trailer trash? No wonder why little Mikey kills his family. Then we are subjected to long, unnecessary scenes in the asylum, with the exception of the murder of the nurse, played by Sybil Danning. The second half of the film, when Myers returns to Haddonfield, is better, but is really just a retread of the original film. A big problem I have with the film is there isn't one character to relate to or like. We get an obnoxious Laurie Strode, played by Scott Taylor Compton, making obscene finger gestures with a donut. Dr. Loomis, played by Malcolm McDowell, who doesn't have an ounce of the appeal Donald Pleasance had. Brad Dourif plays Sheriff Brackett and is somewhat likable, I guess. The film is sprinkled with stars from the 70s, and oh yeah, of course, Rob's wife, Sherry Moon Zombie, as Mikey Myers' mom, Deborah Myers. Halloween 2, 2009, rated R, 1 hour, 45 minutes, written and directed by Rob Zombie. I actually like this story a little bit better than the previous one. Well, everything that doesn't involve Myers or Loomis. What did I like? Annie surviving the attack, Laurie being addicted to her medication, and the fantastic performance by Margot Kidder as Laurie's therapist. What I couldn't stand was Myers sitting around in some cabin out in the wilderness for a year, having dreams about Ghost, Mom, and white horses, and Sam Loomis becoming an even bigger scumbag than he was in the first movie. Oh my. I'm glad this ended the run of Rob Zombie's reimaging. Halloween 2018, rated R, 1 hour, 45 minutes, directed by David Gordon Green, written by David Gordon Green and Danny McBride. From a continuity standpoint, Halloween is probably the most messed up series out there. I haven't seen this many do-overs since the kickball game in elementary school. Halloween 2018 is the third time the Arcade family has pressed the reset button, wiping away all the storylines you've come to know, including Myers and Laurie being siblings. Halloween 2018 is a sequel to the original 1978 classic only. Taking place 40 years later, this is the story of Laurie Strode, what she has gone through and become because of that night. Far better, in my opinion, than the Scream-inspired H2O, but given a choice of a companion piece to the original, I will always go with the 1981 Halloween 2. And so wraps the franchise as a whole, until the release of Halloween Kills in 2020 and Halloween Ends in 2021. From Macabre Theater, I'm Dark Mark. Happy Halloween.